For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On a crisp September morning in 1989, 31-year-old Derek Matthews set out from the Aiguille du Midi station in the French Alps, ready to conquer Mont, Blanc's treacherous north face. An experienced mountaineer and geology professor from Denver, Derek had meticulously planned every detail of his solo climb. He never returned. Despite an exhaustive search by the French Alpine police and numerous volunteer climbers, Derek seemed to have vanished into the mountain's vast expanse of ice and rock. For 27 years, his family lived with the crushing weight of uncertainty, wondering if the mountain had claimed another victim or if something more sinister had occurred. Then, in 2016, a discovery deep within a glacial crevasse would shatter every assumption about Derek's disappearance. This is the complete investigation into what happened to Derek Matthews on that fateful day on Mont Blanc. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's continue. The morning of September 15, 1989, dawned crisp and clear over the Mont Blanc massif, its jagged peaks piercing through wisps of early fog. Derek Matthews stood at the base of the north face, his breath visible in the cold mountain air as he performed his final equipment check. A ritual he had completed countless times during his decade-long climbing career. At 31, the Denver geology professor had earned a reputation among fellow mountaineers for his methodical approach to climbing and unwavering commitment to safety protocols. The massive wall of ice and rock before him stretched nearly 13,000 feet into the sky, a challenge that had drawn climbers from around the world for generations. Derek had spent months preparing for this solo ascent, studying route maps and weather patterns, corresponding with local guides, and conditioning himself for the demanding climb ahead. In his last radio communication with base camp at 6:45 a.m., Derek's voice carried its usual calm confidence. Weather holding steady, beginning ascent on schedule, next check-in at 1100 hours. These would be his final recorded words. His climbing partner, Thomas Weber, waited at the agreed rendezvous point, a small shelter near the Aiguille du Midi cable car station, expecting to meet Derek for the descent as planned. As morning turned to afternoon, the clear skies that had blessed Derek's departure began to cloud over. Thomas maintained his position at the shelter, watching the face of the mountain through binoculars, searching for any sign of his friend's bright blue climbing jacket against the gray-white backdrop of rock and ice. The scheduled check-in time came and passed without word from Derek. By 4 o'clock, with the temperature dropping and visibility deteriorating, Thomas's concern turned to alarm. A thorough search of the immediate area revealed Derek's backup gear bag exactly where he had left it at the shelter, containing his spare clothing, emergency supplies, and satellite phone. Everything was methodically packed, exactly as one would expect from Derek Matthews. The discovery sent a chill through Thomas that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Derek would never abandon his backup equipment, not with night approaching and temperatures set to plummet. Something had gone terribly wrong on the face of Mont Blanc. Thomas immediately contacted the French Alpine police, and within hours, Captain Laurent Moreau had mobilized a search and rescue team. As darkness fell over the mountain, helicopter searchlights swept across the north face, their beams cutting through the gathering gloom. Ground teams worked their way up Derek's planned route, calling his name into the wind and scanning for any sign of distress signals. The search continued through the night and into the following days. Other climbers in the area joined the effort, forming search parties that combed the accessible sections of the route. Derek's sister Sarah flew in from Colorado, her legal training driving her to question every detail, examine every possibility. But as the days stretched into weeks, no trace of Derek Matthews emerged from the mountain's icy embrace. The disappearance defied explanation. There had been no storm, no avalanche, no obvious hazard that could account for the loss of such an experienced climber. Derek's planned route was well documented, his equipment was top quality, and his preparation had been thorough. The mountain seemed to have simply swallowed him whole, leaving behind only questions and the haunting silence of the Alps. As autumn crept toward winter, the search efforts gradually scaled back. The mountain's temperatures dropped further, and fresh snow began to cover whatever clues might have remained. Derek Matthews joined the sad roster of climbers whose final resting place remained a mystery, his disappearance becoming a cautionary tale told in alpine huts and base camps throughout the range. Yet even as the case grew cold, something about Derek's disappearance continued to trouble Captain Morrow. The complete absence of evidence, no equipment, no distress signal, no body suggested this was no ordinary climbing accident. But in 1989, with the technology and resources available, the truth remained tantalizingly out of reach, locked away in the ice and silence of Mont Blanc's north face. Captain Laurent Morrow stood in his office at the Chamonix Alpine Police Headquarters, studying the topographical map of Mont Blanc's north face spread across his desk. 27 years of mountain rescue experience had taught him that disappearances like Derek Matthews rarely happened without leaving some trace, some small detail that could unravel the mystery. The investigation's first priority was a thorough analysis of Derek's abandoned equipment. Each item in the backup gear bag told its own story. The satellite phone was fully charged, the emergency supplies untouched, the spare clothing still carefully folded. These weren't the preparations of someone planning to vanish. They were the methodical arrangements of a climber who fully intended to return. Morrow's team conducted extensive interviews with climbers who had been on the mountain that day. A German couple reported perfect visibility until early afternoon when clouds began rolling in. A Swiss team, descending from a nearby route, had glimpsed a solitary climber in a blue jacket making steady progress up the face around 9 in the morning. The timing and description matched Derek's last known position. Weather data from the day of the disappearance revealed nothing unusual. The barometric pressure had remained stable, winds were moderate, and temperatures hovered around typical September ranges. There had been no sudden storms, no unexpected weather events that might have caught an experienced climber off guard. The search teams had methodically photographed and documented every section of Derek's planned route accessible to them. These images were analyzed for signs of equipment failure, rock falls, or avalanche activity. Nothing indicated a catastrophic event. The snow and ice conditions had been favorable, with good stability in the snowpack and minimal crevasse danger reported by other climbing parties. What troubled Morrow most was the complete absence of emergency signals. Derek's equipment included multiple signaling devices, a whistle, flares, and a highly reflective emergency blanket. If he had encountered trouble and remained conscious, he would have had several ways to attract attention. The fact that he used none of them suggested either a sudden, catastrophic event or, more disturbing, a scenario in which he was prevented from signaling for help. Sarah Matthews proved to be both a resource and a challenge during the investigation. Her legal background drove her to demand ever more thorough searches, more detailed analyses, more extensive interviews. She compiled her own timeline of events, cross-referencing witness statements and search patterns, looking for gaps or inconsistencies that might have been overlooked. The investigation expanded to include reviews of other incidents on the mountain that season. Several climbers had reported minor equipment theft from base camps and shelters, but nothing significant enough to warrant more than routine reports. In retrospect, these incidents would take on new significance, but in 1989, they appeared unrelated to Derek's disappearance. As autumn progressed, deteriorating weather conditions severely hampered search efforts. Fresh snowfall obscured any remaining physical evidence, and dropping temperatures made extended searches increasingly dangerous. Morrow found himself facing the hardest part of any mountain investigation, knowing when to scale back the active search phase. The case file grew thick with witness statements, search grid maps, and photographs, but answers remained elusive. Morrow had investigated dozens of mountain accidents over his career, but something about this one felt different. The complete lack of physical evidence, the absence of any clear explanation, the nagging sense that they were missing something crucial. It all pointed to something more complex than a simple climbing accident. By the time winter settled over Mont Blanc, the active investigation had been officially suspended. But Morrow kept the file on his desk, returning to it between other cases, studying the photographs and reports, convinced that somewhere in the mountain's icy silence lay the truth about what happened to Derek Matthews. He couldn't know then that the answer would remain frozen in time for nearly 3 decades, preserved in the glacial ice that had claimed so many secrets over the years. The years following Derek Matthews' disappearance settled into a painful rhythm of diminishing hope and persistent questions. Each spring, as the snow began to recede from Mont Blanc's lower slopes, Sarah Matthews would return to Chamonix, driven by an unwavering determination to find answers about her brother's fate. Her law office in Denver became a repository of files, photographs, and theories, the case consuming her spare moments between environmental litigation work. The climbing community never quite forgot Derek Matthews. His reputation for safety and meticulous planning made his disappearance all the more unsettling, challenging the comfortable assumption that experience and careful preparation could guarantee protection against the mountain's dangers. During the 10th anniversary of his disappearance, a group of American and French climbers organized a memorial ascent, following Derek's planned route as closely as possible, placing a small plaque at the Aiguille du Midi station. Captain Laurent Morrow watched these annual pilgrimages with a mixture of professional interest and personal frustration. Each new climbing season brought the possibility of discovery, as shifting ice and melting snow gradually revealed secrets from the mountain's depths. Other missing climbers had been found this way, sometimes decades after their disappearance, the glaciers reluctantly surrendering their remains. But year after year, Derek Matthews remained an enigma. The case file in the Alpine Police archives grew thin with age, its pages yellow at the edges, photographs fading slightly. Newer officers would sometimes pull it out during quiet moments, studying the details of this legendary disappearance. The complete absence of evidence continued to puzzle investigators. Even in cases where bodies were never recovered, some trace usually remained: a piece of equipment, a torn rope, a sign of struggle or accident. The total void in Derek's case defied explanation. Sarah Matthews never stopped pushing for new investigations. She hired private investigators, consulted with climbing experts, and maintained regular contact with the Alpine Police. Her legal training served her well as she methodically built alternative theories, examined weather patterns, and interviewed other climbers who had been on the mountain that day. But each new lead eventually ran cold. Each theory collapsed under the weight of missing evidence. The local climbing guides of Chamonix kept their own informal watch. They knew every crevasse and couloir of Mont Blanc's north face, and over the years, they developed an almost supernatural awareness of changes in the glacier's surface. Some reported occasional glimpses of colored fabric or metal glinting in the ice, but follow-up searches never yielded concrete results. As technology advanced, Sarah attempted to apply new tools to the old mystery. Satellite imagery, improved mapping techniques, and more sophisticated search and rescue equipment offered fresh hope. But the mountain kept its secret, and Derek's disappearance remained one of the most baffling cases in alpine rescue history. The case's impact rippled through the climbing community in subtle ways. Guide services tightened their solo climbing policies. Equipment manufacturers emphasized redundant safety systems. The Alpine Police refined their search and rescue protocols, incorporating lessons learned from the failed search for Derek. His disappearance became a case study in mountain safety courses, a reminder that even the most experienced climbers could vanish without a trace. By 2015, most people had accepted that Derek Matthews' fate would remain one of the mountain's many mysteries. The active investigation had long since been suspended, the file gathering dust alongside other unsolved cases. Sarah's visits to Chamonix became less frequent, though she never completely abandoned hope. Captain Morrow, nearing retirement, still occasionally pulled out the file, studying the familiar photographs and reports, wondering what detail they had missed. But mountains keep their secrets on their own timeline. As the glacier continued its slow, inexorable movement down the face of Mont Blanc, it carried with it fragments of the past, preserved in its icy grip. And in the spring of 2016, the ice would finally begin to reveal the truth about Derek Matthews' last climb, starting with a simple length of climbing rope that emerged from the melting glacier, setting in motion a chain of events that would finally bring answers to questions that had haunted Chamonix for 27 years. The spring thaw of 2016 brought an unusually warm spell to the Mont Blanc Massif, accelerating the glacial melt that had been steadily increasing over the decades. On May 12, a French climbing team making an early season ascent noticed something unusual protruding from the ice near the base of a crevasse. A length of climbing rope, its once bright colors muted by years of encasement in the glacier. The discovery might have gone unreported, like so many pieces of abandoned equipment found on the mountain each season, except for the keen eye of Jean-Pierre Blanc, the team's lead climber. The rope's weathered surface bore the distinctive weave pattern of a discontinued brand popular in the late 1980s. More intriguingly, the section emerging from the ice showed signs of having been cut rather than broken, a clean, diagonal slice that spoke of human intervention rather than natural wear. When the Alpine Police recovery team arrived, led by Captain Morrow's successor, they discovered that the rope was remarkably well preserved within its icy tomb. The glacier had acted as a natural freezer, protecting the material from degradation that would normally occur over nearly 3 decades of exposure. The team carefully photographed and documented the rope's position before extracting a 2-meter section from the ice. The rope was immediately sent to the forensic laboratory in Geneva, where Professor Elena Rodriguez had recently pioneered new techniques for extracting DNA evidence from materials exposed to extreme environmental conditions. Her team had developed methods specifically for analyzing artifacts recovered from glacial environments, but even they were surprised by what they found. The initial analysis revealed multiple DNA profiles preserved in the fibers of the rope. The first matched samples provided by Sarah Matthews years earlier, Derek's genetic signature, frozen in time. But it was the second DNA profile that transformed a routine evidence examination into a breakthrough. Unknown at the time, this DNA would prove to be the key that finally unlocked the mystery of Derek Matthews' disappearance. Professor Rodriguez's team worked meticulously, applying cutting-edge genetic analysis techniques that hadn't existed when Derek first vanished. The extreme cold had preserved cellular material trapped in the rope's fibers, providing DNA samples of remarkable quality for their age. The unknown profile was complete enough to run through international databases, opening up investigative possibilities that would have been impossible in 1989. The discovery galvanized the long-dormant investigation. Captain Morrow, though retired, was called in as a consultant, bringing his intimate knowledge of the original case. Sarah Matthews flew to Chamonix immediately upon hearing the news, her hope rekindled by this tangible link to her brother's last climb. The rope represented the first physical evidence ever found in the case, and its very existence challenged the long-held theories about Derek's disappearance. As Professor Rodriguez's team continued their analysis, they made another crucial discovery. Trace evidence preserved in the rope's core suggested it had been exposed to a specific type of rock dust found only in certain areas of the Mont Blanc massif. This geological signature helped investigators narrow down the rope's original location, providing new search areas that had never been fully explored during the initial investigation. The presence of that second DNA profile raised disturbing questions. Derek had been climbing alone. His rope should have contained only his genetic material. The existence of unknown DNA suggested that someone else had been on the mountain with him that day, someone whose presence had never been officially recorded. This revelation transformed what had long been considered a tragic accident into something potentially more sinister. The Alpine police reopened the case officially in June 2016. The rope and its secrets became the center of an investigation that would employ both traditional detective work and modern forensic science. After 27 years frozen in time, the truth about Derek Matthews' fate was finally beginning to emerge from the ice, one scientific test at a time. The discovery sent shockwaves through the climbing community of Chamonix. Those who remembered the original disappearance found themselves revisiting old memories, reconsidering past assumptions. The revelation that Derek might not have been alone on the mountain that day cast a new and unsettling light on other incidents from that era, suggesting patterns that had gone unnoticed for nearly 3 decades. As summer approached and more of the glacier retreated, search teams returned to the area where the rope had been found, hoping the ice might yield more secrets. The mountain, having kept its silence for so long, seemed finally ready to tell the story of Derek Matthews' last climb, beginning with a length of rope that had waited patiently in the ice for 27 years to be found. The identification of the second DNA profile on Derek's rope launched a new phase of the investigation, one that would combine modern forensic techniques with old-fashioned detective work. Professor Elena Rodriguez's team worked around the clock, running the unknown genetic markers through every available database, while Captain Morrow emerged from retirement to assist the current Alpine police team with his deep knowledge of the original case. The DNA testing revealed something unexpected. The unknown profile belonged to someone who had been in regular contact with climbing equipment. Trace elements in the cellular material suggested frequent exposure to the specific metal alloys used in carabiners and other climbing hardware. This pointed investigators toward someone intimately familiar with mountaineering gear. Cross-referencing the DNA results with European criminal databases initially yielded no matches. However, when the search parameters were expanded to include records from routine guide certification testing, a match finally emerged. The DNA belonged to Marcus Dubois, a former mountain guide who had worked in the Chamonix region throughout the 1980s and early 1990s. Dubois' name had never appeared in the original investigation files. His guide certification and work records showed him operating in the Mont Blanc region during the time of Derek's disappearance, but he had never come forward as a witness. More intriguingly, his career as a guide had ended abruptly in 1992, shortly after a series of unexplained equipment thefts from various base camps had suddenly ceased. The investigation team began building a profile of Marcus Dubois. They discovered a pattern of suspicious incidents that had occurred during his time as a guide. Several climbers had reported missing equipment after crossing paths with him, though no formal charges were ever filed. Others recalled unusual encounters with Dubois on remote sections of climbing routes, far from his assigned guiding areas. Sarah Matthews, reviewing these findings in the Alpine Police headquarters, felt a chill as she recognized the implications. The scattered reports painted a picture of someone who had used his position as a guide to operate on the mountain's most isolated routes, targeting solo climbers in small groups. The revelation that such a predator had been active during the time of her brother's disappearance brought both horror and hope. Horror at what Derek might have encountered, hope that they were finally approaching the truth. Captain Morrow's experience proved invaluable as the team reconstructed the events of September 1989. The location where the rope was found aligned with a little-used traverse that Dubois had been known to frequent. It was a perfect spot for encountering climbers away from prying eyes, with natural features that could conceal evidence of confrontation. The investigation took on new urgency when Professor Rodriguez's team made another breakthrough. Microscopic analysis of the rope fibers revealed traces of a struggle, distinct patterns of stress and friction that could only have been caused by violent movement. The rope hadn't simply been cut and discarded. It told a story of conflict high on the face of Mont Blanc. As investigators dug deeper into Dubois' past, they discovered he had maintained detailed climbing logs during his years as a guide. These records, stored in the Guide Services archives, showed him logging a solo reconnaissance climb on the north face the day before Derek's disappearance. The entry was unusual. Most guides didn't conduct solo recons in that area, and it placed Dubois in the perfect position to intercept Derek's planned route. The modern investigation had advantages its predecessor lacked. Advanced satellite imagery allowed the team to reconstruct the glacier's movement over the past 27 years, helping them identify other areas where evidence might have been preserved. Ground-penetrating radar revealed anomalies in the ice that would guide future search efforts. By late summer 2016, the investigation had assembled enough evidence to justify questioning Marcus Dubois. Now 58 and living in quiet retirement in a small village near Grenoble, he had built a seemingly normal life, leaving his mountain past behind. But the DNA evidence had created an unbreakable link between him and one of the Alps' most enduring mysteries, a link that would soon force him to confront the secrets he had kept frozen in silence for nearly 3 decades. The confrontation with Marcus Dubois took place on a rainy morning in September 2016, almost exactly 27 years after Derek Matthews vanished from Mont Blanc. 2 investigators from the Alpine police found him tending to his garden, his weathered hands working the soil with the same methodical precision he had once applied to climbing ropes and anchor points. When presented with the DNA evidence, Dubois' facade cracked almost immediately. Decades of carrying his secret had taken their toll, and in the small interrogation room of the Grenoble police station, the truth finally emerged. His voice, barely above a whisper, began to unspool the events of that September morning in 1989. Dubois had established a lucrative side operation during his guiding years, targeting solo climbers in remote sections of the mountain. He would study their planned routes, intercept them at isolated points, and rob them of their valuable equipment. Most victims, finding themselves suddenly stripped of crucial gear at dangerous altitudes, would retreat without filing reports, too embarrassed to admit their vulnerability. Derek Matthews had stumbled upon Dubois' operation by accident. Making better time than expected on his ascent, Derek had rounded a corner to find Dubois rifling through another climber's abandoned gear cache. The confrontation that followed was brief but violent. Derek, with his strong ethical principles, had threatened to report Dubois to the authorities. In those crucial moments, Dubois made a decision that would haunt him for the next 27 years. He attacked Derek, using his intimate knowledge of the mountain to force him toward a deep crevasse. The struggle was desperate, with Derek fighting for his life on the narrow ledge. In the end, Dubois cut Derek's rope and watched as both the climber and the evidence of his crimes disappeared into the glacier's depths. The detailed confession revealed how Dubois had carefully covered his tracks. He collected Derek's loose equipment, dispersing it across different regions of the Alps over the following months. He continued his guiding work, even participating in some of the initial search efforts, using his insider knowledge to steer teams away from the actual location. The weight of his actions had slowly crushed Dubois' spirit. He abandoned guiding 3 years later, retreating to a quiet life where he thought he could escape his past. But the glacier, moving inexorably downward year after year, had preserved the evidence of his crime. The rope, with its damning DNA evidence, had waited patiently in the ice to tell its story. Sarah Matthews, listening to the recorded confession, finally understood her brother's last moments. Derek had died not in a tragic accident, but in an act of courage, confronting a predator who had turned the mountain into his hunting ground. The revelation brought a complex mixture of grief and pride. Grief for the brutal truth of his death, pride in knowing he had stood up for what was right. Captain Morrow, though retired, was present when Dubois led investigators to the location where he had encountered Derek. The spot was now significantly altered by 27 years of glacial movement, but ground-penetrating radar revealed a shape deep in the ice that would later be confirmed as human remains. The confession solved more than just Derek's disappearance. Dubois admitted to dozens of robberies over his guiding career, targeting climbers from various nations who had come to challenge Mont Blanc. His scheme had taken advantage of the mountain's inherent dangers, using the assumption of accident or misadventure to cover his crimes. In the end, it was the mountain itself that had brought justice, preserving the evidence in its icy grip until science and circumstance aligned to reveal the truth. The glacier, moving at its own immutable pace, had finally surrendered the secret of Derek Matthews' fate, bringing closure to a mystery that had haunted the climbing community for nearly 3 decades. The recovery of Derek Matthews' remains from the glacier in October 2016 marked the final chapter of a mystery that had endured for 27 years. A specialized team of alpine rescue workers, using coordinates provided by Marcus Dubois, worked methodically through layers of ice that had preserved both evidence and remains with remarkable clarity. The recovery operation, conducted under the watchful eye of Captain Laurent Morrow, brought a sense of closure that many had thought impossible. Sarah Matthews stood at the base camp during the recovery, her brother's final resting place visible as a dark spot in the ice where the recovery team worked. The moment carried a weight of finality that decades of uncertainty never had. The remains, though altered by time and ice, still carried traces of the bright blue jacket Derek had worn on his final climb, a detail that had featured in so many missing person reports over the years. The court proceedings against Marcus Dubois began in early 2017. The prosecution presented a compelling case, combining the DNA evidence with Dubois' detailed confession. The court heard testimony from Professor Elena Rodriguez, who explained how the preserved rope had provided the crucial breakthrough. Captain Morrow, though retired, testified about the original investigation and the many questions that had plagued it for nearly 3 decades. Dubois' confession revealed the extent of his crimes. Beyond Derek's murder, he had committed over 40 robberies on the mountain, targeting solo climbers and small groups in remote areas. His intimate knowledge of Mont Blanc's terrain had allowed him to operate undetected for years, using the mountain's natural hazards to disguise his crimes. The judge, noting the calculated nature of his actions and the profound impact on the climbing community, sentenced him to 25 years in prison. The resolution of Derek's case prompted significant changes in alpine security protocols. The French Alpine Guide Association implemented stricter background checks and regular reviews of guide credentials. New regulations required guides to log their locations more precisely and maintain clear communication with base stations. The Aiguille du Midi station installed a comprehensive camera system to monitor climbing routes previously considered too remote for surveillance. Sarah Matthews channeled her grief and relief into action. Using her environmental law expertise, she established the Derek Matthews Mountain Safety Foundation, working with alpine rescue organizations to improve safety protocols and support families of missing climbers. The foundation's first initiative funded new DNA analysis equipment for the Geneva Forensics Laboratory, ensuring that future cases could benefit from the same technology that had solved her brother's disappearance. The climbing community of Chamonix gathered in June 2017 for the dedication of a memorial to Derek at the Aiguille du Midi station. The simple bronze plaque bore not only his name and dates, but also a brief acknowledgement of his final act of courage in confronting a threat to his fellow climbers. The ceremony attracted mountaineers from around the world, many of whom had participated in searches over the years or been inspired by the enduring mystery of his disappearance. The scientific implications of Derek's case extended beyond solving a single crime. Professor Rodriguez's successful extraction and analysis of DNA from materials preserved in glacial ice opened new possibilities in cold case investigation. The techniques developed for analyzing the rope fibers became standard procedure in cases involving high-altitude evidence recovery, contributing to the resolution of other long-dormant investigations. Captain Morrow, in his final interview before fully retiring, reflected on the case that had haunted much of his career. The resolution brought a bittersweet satisfaction, validation of his long-held suspicions that Derek's disappearance was no ordinary accident, coupled with regret that the truth had remained hidden for so long. The case had changed how he viewed mountain investigations, teaching him that sometimes the most important evidence lies preserved in the ice, waiting for science to advance enough to reveal its secrets. As winter returned to Mont Blanc in late 2017, the mountain's face had changed in subtle ways. New security measures and monitoring systems marked the routes where Dubois had once operated with impunity. The glacier continued its slow descent, perhaps still carrying other secrets in its icy depths. But Derek Matthews' story had finally emerged from the ice, providing answers to questions that had echoed through the valleys of Chamonix for 27 years and bringing long-delayed justice to the mountain's halls.